So today we start Beowulf, which is in here somewhere. Oh, that's right. He's got this ordered strange. Beowulf, there we go. And you've got a, not necessarily a lengthy, but you got a good introduction to Beowulf. And I don't know if I put it up yet. I don't remember if I put it up yet or not. I will put up on D2L a couple of documents that will either help you understand a little bit better the relationships of various peoples and kind of feuds in the poem, or that will confuse you even more. One of those two. And I did these documents before Lewis' translation came out in the Broadview, because it's essentially, you've got a glossary of proper names here. Well, I've got about a 4-page one of those. But it's not a glossary, it's kind of a list of relationships. Actually, it's not a 4-page one of those. That one's kind of short. But then I also have a list of the feuds. Who's in feud with who else, etc. And then also a genealogy, which you have here. So, Beowulf. The title of the poem is a modern construction. In the manuscript, it doesn't have a title. As I said about the other poems, none of those poems have titles in the manuscripts. All of those are given by modern editors on the basis generally of what the thing is about. Well, this is generally about Beowulf. Early editions actually called it Beowulf's Drapa, which is kind of Beowulf's struggle, Beowulf's fights, you know. Beowulf's death is one early, but Beowulf. It's in the Beowulf manuscript, which has the shelf mark, Cotton, Vitellius, A15, and if you want to get really particular, it's London, British Library, Cotton Vitellius, A15. Why? Because the manuscript was owned by a man named Sir Robert Bruce Cotton, who was a collector, antiquarian, and he had a big library. Think of the library as being like this room, because it actually wasn't much larger than this room. And on each of the walls, he had bookcases, what were called book presses. All right? On top of each bookcase, he had a bust of a Roman emperor, beginning with A, ending with the last, with probably V. So he had Aurelius and Nero and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, Augustus to Vitellius. Right? And then the way he classified the items in his library, think of this as early, you know, Dewey Library of Congress classification. First shelf was A, second shelf was B, C, D, E, however many shelves there were. Okay, so you could have Cotton Vitellius H, which would probably mean you're in the second case if there, you know, if you had 2 busts of Vitellius, if you had that much stuff. But it's Cotton A15, A, top shelf, 15th item in from the left. Okay. Now, if you look at the manuscript, this is it. Kill the lights a little bit. Notice this edge is nice and straight. Okay. This edge is all jagged. Why? Because in 1731, there was a fire. At Ashburnham House, which is where Cotton had his, which is where the library was. And The manuscripts and books caught fire. Not all of them, but many of them caught fire. Because this was a quote-unquote national treasure, they rushed to the fire and started taking the manuscripts, books out of the bookcases and literally throwing them out the window to preserve them.
I mean, it's better than burning.
Better than burning. Because they still have in the British Library today some of these manuscripts that did burn. They turned essentially into charcoal. But somebody, I have no idea why, in 1731 had the wisdom to think, maybe someday someone will be able to read this. And now we can. Through, I don't remember what it's called. Has something to do with mass spectrometry and chemistry. Anyways, now we can. So we can see what is inside some of these manuscripts. Similarly, scrolls have been discovered from the Library of Herculaneum, which was destroyed when Vesuvius erupted and destroyed Pompeii. See, Pompeii preserved a bunch of bodies and the city and stuff. Some of the scrolls from the great Library of Herculaneum were also destroyed, burned. But the scrolls were preserved in the ash. They've been discovered. And now, through these new techniques, even though the scrolls never get open, because you try to open it and it turns to dust. Now, those things can be read. Because it's almost, I'm going to give an analogy. It's not using MRI technology, but it's like MRI technology. Which goes through and takes a slice in one image. And it does that a whole bunch of times to produce the total image that you get. Well, the same kind of thing, so that they can get, that. They can get the imprint of ink on a single layer of vellum. Okay? That's how some of the Dead Sea Scrolls that are also, essentially charcoal or unreadable have been read and such. Okay, so we have this manuscript, dates from about 1000 AD, and it tells us the story of this guy named Beowulf. Two important questions relate to this. Let me turn this off for just a second. Let me send the projector up. Project screen. Turn the lights back up a bit. One of the important questions is actually one important question that I'll talk about. When was the poem composed? Okay. And the reason this is important I said the manuscript date is circa 1000. Want to get a little more specific? 975 to 1025. Was the poem composed kind of contemporaneous with the manuscript? So, late date, or was the poem composed earlier? And it had merely been copied and passed down. This is the only version we have. We don't hear about the character Beowulf or Grendel, characters of Beowulf or Grendel, in any other literature at all. None. There are 3 references, or 2 to 3 references, to a Beowulf and or Grendel in charters. There is a Grendel's Mere in one of the charters, Anglo-Saxon charters. There is a Beowulf's Hum Beowulf's home in another one. And this is like a landmark. You know, like, get on Interstate 40, head down, go about 3 clicks, and take a right when you see that big old mountain. Kind of like that. Take a right when you see that big old Grendel's mirror kind of a thing. Okay? And there's one other one, and I can't remember, I think it's Grendel's home. Grendel's home. Okay? But we don't think they have anything to do at all with the Beowulf and Grendel that are in this poem. Okay? Because the Beowulf and the Grendel that are in this poem in what location? Where's the poem set?
Hunter's Hall. No.
It's too narrow. Where's Hrothgar's Hall? That's only part of the setting. Scandinavia. Denmark, Sweden. So yeah, Danes, Swedes. What's the other major tribe? Beowulf the Geat, or Yeat, as some people will pronounce it. All right? The Old English would have been Yeat. Modern English people just say Geat. Okay? Here's why all of this is important. If the poem has a late date, and notice I haven't filled it in to say contemporaneous, but if it has a late date, we'll say 10th century on. So 10th century, 900 or later. Okay? Then you interpret it very, very differently than if it has an early date. Early date, 7th century on, 600. Okay? Now, is there anything in the poem that is historical? There is, actually. The character of Feud may not himself be historical, but Feud, S-C-Y-L-D, is cognate with Old Norse skjold. Okay? If I put this on, shielding, that is skjolding. Okay? The skjoldings were real. Those were real people in Denmark. All right? There's another person in the poem that is real. Beowulf's uncle, Hygelac. Also pronounced Hygelac. Okay? Hygelac. His name means thought-lack, mind-lack. Or you can reverse the order, lack thought. You want to have the name lack thought? Because that kind of implies what about you?
You're dumb.
Yeah, you're not dealing with a full deck there. Okay? He's real. He's referred to in several historical accounts. Gregory of Tours, in his History of the Franks, refers to Hygelac, and in there, the name, it's in Latin, is Clociliacus. Okay? And he actually tells us where he's buried. And it says, at the time of the writing of History of the Franks, and you can go to the Rhine River and go to this island and you can see his bones. Because one of the interesting things about Hygelac, according to the historical accounts, is that he was, for all intents and purposes, a giant. Not a giant Hagrid giant, but like Shaquille O'Neal giant. 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall. Okay? Because one of the things that's described is the length of his thigh bones. All right? He's also mentioned in a couple of books that are the books are Liber Monstrorum. What does this look like or sound like?
Monster.
Of monsters. Not freedom, like library. Books of monsters. There's a reason he's in these quote-unquote books of monsters, and it's because of his size. In fact, one famous scholar has suggested that the entire manuscript that preserves Beowulf is a Liber Monstrorum. Because you have monsters in Beowulf, right? Grendel's mother, the dragon. Beowulf is kind of monstrous himself. We'll talk about it. Why are you, people who I don't know calling me all the time? Go away. Judith, which is the poem that comes after Beowulf, is taken to be monstrous. Why? Because Judith, Old Testament biblical story, pseudepigrapha, or apocryphal literature, is a Jewish heroine who kills a man who attempts to rape her. A guy named Holofernes. Their story shows up in a lot of Western literature. It even shows up in Shakespeare. Okay? But that's kind of monstrous behavior. One, both the rape and then the woman killing the man. And then there are prose works that come before Beowulf. One of those is the life of St. Christopher. And if you know anything about St. Christopher, he was a dog-headed man. Until he was quote-unquote saved. And then he got a human head. Why is St. Christopher always shown with Christ on his shoulder? Because of the name. Christ, Ofer, bearer. He bore Christ according to the tradition. He carried him over a river. Okay? And had his head changed to our kind of heads. Right? That's one. There's another thing called the Wonders of the East, which is kind of like a travelogue. Going off into the east, into the Arabian desert and such, and meeting all kinds of strange, wondrous, monstrous creatures, like people with one leg. Not one leg, they've had one amputated. It's kind of C.S. Lewis's duffel puds from Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Okay? And then letter of Alexander to Aristotle. Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher. And Alexander the Great's writing his teacher this letter about all the strange stuff he's seen when he went off into the east, towards India and such. Okay? So there's all these strange tales. So Andy Orchard has suggested that the entire collection in this manuscript are monster stories. Okay? So he's real. And according to Gregory of Tours, he died in 520 AD. That's a datable, historical point. All right? So, if we take that as the starting point kind of for the setting of the tale, well, some of what occurs in the poem exists or occurs before Helak dies. And some of it occurs after Helak dies. We don't know how much occurs before, and we don't know how much occurs after, because we don't know how old Beowulf is in the beginning of the tale when we first see him. Okay? Because I'm going to suggest he is anywhere from possibly minimum 20 wild guess. Where does that end? What age?
49.
Pretty close. I'd say about 55. Why is this significant? Okay, how many of you have studied Beowulf before? Read it before? Taught it before in an English class of sorts? What happens after Beowulf arrives? I mean, very, very brief overview. What's the general plot?
He goes to Hrothgar, parties for a few days, kills, and goes and says he's going to kill Grendel. Goes, kills Grendel. Grendel's mother comes along. He kills her as well. Gets poisoned. No, the dragon comes and he gets poisoned by the dragon.
When does the dragon come?
After the burial.
You just compressed everything really, really fast. Okay. Poem opens. Hrothgar becomes king. Hrothgar rules. We don't know how long. Grendel shows up. Grendel stays a while. Comes back every night, eats a bunch of people, goes away. Beowulf comes after 12 years of Grendel's depredations. Okay, so from that opening of when Hrothgar becomes king to when Beowulf comes, 12 years have elapsed. All right? Beowulf comes, the very day Beowulf comes, he spends the night in the hall. Grendel comes, Beowulf kills Grendel. The next night, Grendel's mother comes. Beowulf kills Grendel's mother. Sorry to give that away if you've never read it before. Beowulf kills Grendel's mother. The next day, Beowulf leaves. 3 days. Yeah, yes, there are some biblical parallels. We'll talk about those. Okay? 3 days. He goes back to his homeland, the land of the Geats. We don't know how much time passes from when he goes back home to when Beowulf becomes king. We do know he goes back home. His uncle, the king of the Geats, leads a charge into the Frankish kingdom. He gets killed. His son, Hardred, becomes king. Beowulf kind of stands behind the throne, flexes to scare everybody away. He stays king for a while, but he dies fairly young. We don't know how long. And then Beowulf becomes king. And how long does Beowulf rule?
Until the dragon.
50 years. So, you get however old Beowulf is at the beginning, plus an unknown number of years, plus 50 years. And then the dragon comes. So that means, at minimum, if this is 1 year, he's at least 70. I'll leave the 1 year out even. When the dragon comes. But then when you start playing with these numbers, $105, not including these years. Okay? Beowulf can be, it's possible, he can be really old when he fights the dragon. We're not told how old Hrothgar is when Grendel comes. We are going to be told by Hrothgar, okay, that he ruled the kingdom 50 years. Then Grendel came. Grendel was there for 12 years. So he's been ruling for 62 years. Oh, so that's wrong. It's not 55. He's been ruling for 62 years. So Beowulf's got to be at least 60, I would say. I'm just, using 5 for a number. Why? Because Hrothgar is going to say, I knew Beowulf as a boy. Boys, not 15. Not in this society. That's pretty close to a man and old enough to wield a sword. Okay? So we'll talk about that. Okay? So you've got that going on. So early, let's talk about this for a moment. If it's early, if it dates from 600, let's say, or even 600, 700, that means the action of the story is within 100 to 200 years of the actual events in the story. That's like us to the Civil War. It's not that long ago. But if it's this, you're talking 400 or 500 years ago. That's a lot longer. It becomes much more hazy, much more foggy, much more fairy tale-ish, possibly. All right? Well, what else? What happens between here and here in England? Because it's written in Old English. It's not written in Old Norse. Something I started before class kind of even began, talking about the Vikings. They begin invading the very late 8th century. That's right smack in the middle of here. Well, who are the Vikings? They're the descendants of all these people. They're the descendants of the Danes, the Swedes, the Geats, the Norse. Actually, the Geats are gone by the 9th century. Gone, wiped out, no longer exist whatsoever. Okay? So you've got this poem written in Old English, seemingly celebrating this heroic culture and society, which is made up of ancestors of the Vikings. The Vikings come, they start raping, pillaging, destroying your country. How likely is it, according to some scholars, how likely is it you're going to find some English poet transmitting a poem that was written a few hundred years earlier that celebrates these people's ancestors, and it keeps getting copied? You know? Was it likely? Let's get modern kind of. In the United States, 2001, late fall, would it be likely to have some poet celebrating, the ancestors of the terrorists who did the deeds of 9/11? No. Not really, because what's in everybody's mind? What's going to happen next? Because in the 8th century, and then in the 9th century, did the Vikings just hit once and leave? No. It was repeated raids. I mean, in the late 8th century, they would hit, leave. Hit, leave. Go down the coastline. Maybe go up a river a little bit. But gradually, they started hitting and staying. Like staying over the winter. Why? Look at a map. Where is England, latitude-wise, compared to, I don't know, take your pick. Norway. Norway's up close to the Arctic Circle. Part of it is in the Arctic Circle. England is not. Much, much harsher winters up here than down here. Okay? I think I'd rather stay in Baja than up here during the winter. So they start wintering over. Then they start building farmsteads. Then they start marrying Anglo-Saxon women. They start bringing their wives and children from their lands and living. And this is why every word in the English language today, that begins with the sk sound comes from the Vikings. So when you say skin, that word is not Old English. That word is Viking. When you say sky, that is Viking. When you even say, this is not one that begins with sk, but it's another one, that's Norse. It's not an English word. Okay, so every one that begins with sk, and every time you add an ing on a present participle, you are speaking Viking. Every time you add an s on the third person singular verb, he, she, it goes, runs, talks, sings, dances, you are speaking Viking. It's the only form, these are the only forms of another language that entered English and changed the literal grammar. Latin didn't change the grammar. French didn't change the grammar. Spanish didn't change the grammar. Arabic didn't change the grammar. They all gave us tons of words. I still blame the Arabs for giving us this dirty swear word. Algebra. Bad word, you know. dirtier than some of the swear words I put on the board. Okay? Old Norse changed the English language. Why? Because Old Norse and Old English were so similar. Okay? So, how you date the poem has got to determine how you interpret it. If it's an early date, then it records something that is close in action to the nature of the poem, so that you need to pay attention to the customs and the mores and all those kinds of things. If it's closer to this, then you have much more the idea of what Tolkien kind of suggests in his great essay, even though he holds to an early date, that it is kind of a nostalgic looking back on a great age of heroes. Yeah, these are pagan heroes. Yeah, according to one particular Christian mindset, that means they're damned. They're all rotten in hell. But even though they were pagan and damned rotting in hell, they still had some virtues to be emulated. Okay? By the way, and if you're not familiar with that, that's the basis of the Lord of the Rings. Middle Earth is a quote-unquote damned pagan society. There is no Christian hope to Middle Earth. You die, you go off to your fathers, which means it's a nice little metaphor for you rot in the ground. Okay? Even though in some of Tolkien's literature surrounding the Lord of the Rings, there is a quote-unquote Christian hope. He just didn't want to make it blatant. Okay. Having spoken way too much background kind of stuff. So the poem begins the same way the Dream of the Rood began. Whacked. Let's pull this back up for a second. On your screen. Down. Lighting. Down. You've got the facsimile image in your book. Come on. But this is a little bit better. So this is what Old English manuscripts typically look like. Notice, the words on the page are not arranged nicely like they are in your page. So it took the first Anglo-Saxon scholars to determine where are the word breaks, okay, where are the line breaks, because here you have, notice, nice big fat capital H, what, way, that's a modern W, it's called a win, what, way, guard, you can just barely see the E, guard day, and then it breaks off, na. Okay, the na is part of the word Gardena, but there's no hyphen. Okay? In Yayar Dagum. Well, in your book, which gets translated in bygone days, but in Yayar Dagum is one word. It's separated. I-N, and then you have a little separation between this letter, which is called a yo, Y-O-G-H, which gives us some varying pronunciations, which is why we have varying pronunciations of GH today. Like the GH in enough, or the silent though, or through, okay? As well as a few others. In Yardagum, Theod kinningas thrim jafrunan hutha adelinges alle fremedon. Oft should sheving. So, this is where the manuscript burned. Why? It's the outside pages. Why would the outside pages, but not this side burn?
Probably because it's covered in...
Okay, it does have a leather cover. And these are, I brought a mock-up. When I was studying Beowulf as a doctoral student, I had to do a presentation on it. So I did a mock-up of the entire manuscript. So this is like the manuscript. It wouldn't have this. This is the entire manuscript. Okay? So this would be like the front page, because there would be a leather cover. Okay? So you'd have this. These are the outside pages. These are the binding. Why would this part burn, but not this part? Nope. No glue. Just sewn. Nope.
Was it shelved
Close.
differently?
I'm trying to remember.
It's like, when we shelved, the spines are out.
Yeah, we showed spine. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the spine was out. That's a really good question. Thank you. Check on that.
I guess like the pages would be labeled or
Just look what happens. There's more air between this than there is here. Take this book outside when you're done with this class. If you come to develop a love-hate relationship or a hate-hate relationship with it, take it, throw it out on a fire pit, douse it with lighter fluid, and try and burn it. You know what's going to happen? These few pages will curl up. These few pages will curl up, and everything inside not likely to burn much, except for that outer edge. That's exactly what happened with this. Okay? So, what has happened since that fire, because this isn't paper, it's vellum, it's calfskin, is the vellum gets dry and brittle over age, and it's gradually broken away. Now, copies were made. Transcripts of the Beowulf manuscript were made in the 18th century. Okay? So that we have copies that show a few of the letters that are broken off, which is how editors can produce the version that you can see. Okay, let me turn this back off, because I'm probably going to need screen go up, lighting go on. Listen, we have heard of the glory in bygone days of the folk kings of the Spear Danes, how those noble lords did lofty deeds. Actually, I probably should have kept that up and used the other side. Notice, when was this glory?
Bygone days.
Bygone days. Is the poet making any suggestion, making any comment about now? About the poet's day?
Yes.
What's he saying?
And nowadays it's all bad, right?
These
Okay, that might be a little strong.
There are
It's
no
not as good
heroes
as
like
the old
this.
days.
There aren't heroes like there were. It's not like the good old days. Okay? Where else have we seen that idea? The seafarer. Remember what the seafarer said? There aren't any kings or Caesars like there were of old. Okay? He says there are weaker men now. So this is somebody who is looking at the past and saying, that's when men were men and warriors were warriors. Yeah. The folk kings of the, and we get that term, Spear Danes. We're going to have hyphen Danes a lot. We're going to have Spear Danes, South Danes, North Danes, East Danes, West Danes. Victory Danes. And I think that's pretty much it. Glory Danes. Okay. How those noble lords did lofty deeds. Notice, it's not everybody, it's the kings. Often shield-shoving seized the mead benches from many tribes, troops of enemies, struck fear into earls. Okay, I've got to do it. I don't know why. I'll try. Turn the projector back on. Yes, on. Make the screen come back down. And turn the lighting back down just a little bit. Often shield-shoving, you've got a gloss there. The name means shield, son of sheaf, i.e. son of grain. Okay. A lot of early critics said, oh, this is obviously a fertility god. An agriculture fertility kind of god. Often shield-shoving seized the mead benches from many tribes. We go over on this side, and let's bump that sucker up a bit.
Wait, so scouts,
It's not
how do you say it? It's a
Shield
god.
Chevy.
Shield Shem.
Early,
It's a god.
early critics suggested this is a kind of a metaphor of a fertility god. Okay?
And not an actual
Because of the
shield.
name. Yeah, not an actual god. He did what? Seized the mead benches, okay? Often shield sheving, shadan athratu, moniga mythum, medoset la oftea. This is the seize the mead benches. Okay? From many tribes, troops of enemies struck fear into earls. What does that mean? He seized the mead benches. Did he run into their halls and say, "Get up, I need your seat"? No.
Stole the food off the tables?
No.
Destroy them?
Destroyed them. That's how he seized their mead benches. He killed them. Okay? So translating the Meroset la Oftea, the seats of the mead hall, took. That's what Oftea means. Took. Okay? Isn't simply, we're having a big party. Can I borrow your hall benches? How did he took them? From many tribes, troops of enemies struck fear into earls. Esoda, the Esoda, struck fear. What's another way of putting that today? 2 days after the anniversary of 9/11, terrorized. He terrorized the earls around him. Okay, so shield shiving is an early terrorist. All right? Though he first was found a waif. He awaited solace for that. A waif. Sithen, before or since he first became Fayshaft funden. Fayshaft, without fee. That is, fee, in its Old English word, meaning money. Poor found. He was a foundling. He was an orphan. How was he found? Well, we're going to be told. He first was found a waif. He awaited solace for that. We get the first entrance for this word, frovra, right here. It shows up about 5 or 6 times in the entire manuscript. Okay? And notice what other word? Yabad. That's the same word, different tense, as yabidan. In the wanderer, awaits, expects, hopes for, longs for. This is past tense. Awaited, expected, hoped for, longed for, experienced, frovra. Solace is Lewis's translation. Another one that's commonly used is consolation. So what do you do when you console somebody? You try to alleviate them of what? Their pain, their sorrow, their sadness, their suffering. He awaited, experienced, longed for alleviation of pain, sorrow, sadness, etc. He grew under heaven and prospered in honor until every one of the encircling nations over the whale's writing had to obey him, grant him tribute. Line 10. Whale's writing. A condensed descriptive image of the sea, the writing place of whales. That's a what?
Kenning.
Kenning. It's Old English kenning. Metaphor of a metaphor. Notice, he didn't tell you in the other translations, when he had things like whale road, that it was a condensed, how does he put it? Descriptive image of the sea. So what does that mean? That he prospered in honor until every one of the encircling nations over the ocean had to obey him, grant him tribute. Where is this occurring? Can't see furniture, not what I need. That might work. If it's big enough. That'll work. Okay, so where are we talking? The little island right here of Zealand, and then you get New Zealand on the other side of the ocean. This is Denmark, right here. Here's Sweden. Here's Norway. The Finns are referred to once in the poem. It's on this island that Hrothgar has his hall. What we think may have been Hrothgar's hall, or where it was at least, has been discovered in the town of Lejre. L-E-J-R-E. L-E-J-R-E. So, this is where Skjoldskjeving was. So where are the surrounding nations of the ocean? That's the people all around here.
So New Zealand, Denmark, Norway, Sweden.
This is his island, so to speak. So Denmark, would be modern-day Denmark, northern Germany, southern Sweden. What's this telling us about Skjoldskjeving?
It's powerful.
He's powerful. You don't want to mess with him. How much do you not want to mess with him? You buy him off. You pay tribute to him so that he won't bother you.
Hopefully.
This is the early medieval version of what common practice, I don't know, let's say in New York.
Toll road.
Taxes.
Louder?
Toll road.
No, not quite toll road.
Extortion.
What kind of extortion?
Mafia extortion.
It's a protection racket. I'll pay you to leave me alone. Okay? They had to obey him, grant him tribute. And then we get the first time, the Old English. Now we go back. Why are we not going back?
I think you opened up a new.
You need to exit out
yeah,
of.
You
that
opened
tab.
up a new tab.
It opened up the new
Oh,
tab.
did it? Okay.
Yeah, so now you can go back.
Oh, now I see. Because I can't see the screen very well. So we get, come on, load. Fat was gold kinning. It's said 3 times in the poem. One of them, however, we have a little word ak before that. Okay? That was gold kinning. That was, we would throw in a good king. And if anything, if you were going to punctuate it kind of according to modern language, you would want to put an exclamation mark there. He means, man, what a king. That's a good king. Why? What have we just been told about Skjoldskjeving? What does he do?
He terrorizes other people.
Scares the hell out of his neighbors. That's exactly it. He scares them so much, they pay him money. So that expands his kingdom. That expands his sphere of influence. And we're told early on from the poet, this is a good king. So this is a model of good kingship. Okay? A boy was later born to him, young in the courts, and God sent as a solace to the people. God sent the boy. He, God, saw their need, the dire distress they endured, lordless for such a long time. The Lord of life, wielder of glory, that God sent to the people, him, thus Livra, the Lord of life, the ruler of glory, did what? For Yeof Worlda. He gave him, that's the Freyof, Worlda, glory, honor. Okay? Who is the son?
Beowulf. Not our Beowulf, though.
Beowulf, but not Beowulf. Why? Because in the manuscript, it doesn't say that. In the manuscript, it says... Yeah, I'm trying to find it over here in the text. Might be on the next page. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Okay, here's Thatwas God Kinning. Yeah, the name's on the next page.
What's he actually called?
Beow. B-E-O-W is what the manuscript says.
Oh.
Okay?
Well, then why did they change his name to Beowulf?
Well, look what your gloss says. Not the monster, the manuscript does read Beowulf. Many scholars say that's an error on the part of the scribe, and that it should read B-E-O-W. Okay? Because they're saying this Beowulf is not the same Beowulf as the one later on in the poem. Which, this Beowulf dies early, has children. Okay? But I think the poet possibly might have used Beowulf, the name of the later hero, because he wants to draw a connection between this son of Scyld-Sheving and what happens to Beowulf later in the poem. Look what happens to this son of Scyld-Sheving. Or this, let me put it that way. Beowulf, the son of Scyld, was renowned. His fame spread wide in Scandinavian lands. Scandinavian there is Schedenlanda, is the Old English. Schedelandum Inn, right here. Okay? Then we get a Omen Passage. Anytime you get thus should one or one should behave, you're in a proverb. Okay? Thus should a young man bring about good with pious gifts from his father's possessions. So, a young man should cause good things to happen. A young man should cause good things to happen. How? With pious gifts from his father's possessions. Getting into his father's treasure house and giving stuff out. Why? So that later in life, loyal comrades will stand beside him when war comes. The people will support him. How will they support him? With praiseworthy deeds, a man will prosper among any people. I think this is the poet alluding to us, foreshadowing to us what is going to happen with the hero Beowulf after he has ruled for 50 years. Because if you're familiar with the poem, he goes off to fight the dragon. He chooses the very best of his warriors to come with him. He orders them, stand down. This is my battle alone. Why? Because I'm a monster killer. This is a monster. None of you have fought monsters. This is mine. And when things aren't looking so good for him, one man steps up and intervenes. Are the others just good Germanic soldiers following orders? That's how some read it. Or are they cowards? Well, the one guy who stands up and helps defend Beowulf calls them all cowards later and strips them of all their rights and property and banishes them. So he pretty much thinks you're a bunch of cowards. Again, look at what this says. Thus should a young man bring about good with pious gifts from his father's possessions. How? So that later in life, he will have loyal comrades who will do what? Stand beside him when war comes. Beowulf had one loyal comrade stand beside him when war came. I don't think you can take this and not read it within light of what happens later on in the poem. Okay? Scyld died at his appointed hour. Why his appointed hour? Because, like I've said before, the sands of time start dripping away the moment we're born. The mighty Lord went into the Lord's keeping. That kind of implies what?
He was a Christian.
He was a Christian, but not really. Who is saying that? Is the speaker saying this from within the time frame of Scyld living? No, because that was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Along in bygone days, in Yeardagum. What we have is, if the poem especially is from a late date, we have a Christian poet looking back on pagan time. If the original poem is from an early date, 6th century, maybe, or 7th century, maybe early 8th century, you might have a quote-unquote kind of nominal Christian. That is a guy who's mostly Christian, but he still has some pagan, hang-ups, let's say. Because Christianity, the Roman form at least, hasn't been in England for very long.
So he's just throwing this in here to make sure the poem survives.
Possibly. Or, if the poem's early date, this could be an example of some later Christian interpolation as the poem gets copied. As it gets copied, it gets modified. It gets added to a little bit. Because it might have been originally, according to some, it might have been an originally fully pagan poem. So you wouldn't have he went off into the Lord's keeping. It would be something like he went off into we don't know where. Read the Cadman section again. Or excuse me, not the Cadman, the coming of Christianity. What did the pagan priest think? We don't know what happens when you die. Well, he passed away. He went into the Lord's keeping. That is God's problem now. He doesn't say he goes to heaven. He goes into the Lord takes care. That's, judgment, etc. They bore him down to the brimming sea, his dear comrades, as he himself had commanded, while the friend of the Scyldings wielded speech. Who's the friend of the Scyldings?
The priest?
Nope. That's Scyld. Before he died, he did what? Before he died, John McCain did what? He spelled out exactly how he wanted his funeral done, and who he wanted to attend, and who he did not want to attend. Scyld did the same thing. Okay? He told his men, here's the kind of burial I want. He wants what kind of burial according to modern popular culture? Oh, it's the classic Viking burial, Put him on a boat, send him out. What's only missing? The flaming arrow shot 500 yards off into the sea to land in a boat smaller than the, length of this room. There ain't nobody that can make that shot. First of all, that's total fiction. Total fiction. How do we know? If they were buried that way, what would be the results?
You'd see a lot of ashes in the sea beds, right?
No.
And then you'd see a bunch of sunken boats full of treasure.
No. Because if it burned, what's left? I mean, yeah, there'd be treasure, but where? Bottom of the ocean. Hasn't been found. But we have found boat burials. Not only Sutton Hoo, but boat burials at sea. There have been boats found bottom of the ocean. Okay? That were burial boats. So, they laid him down in the bosom of the ship, glorious by the mast, all kinds of treasure around him. This is Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli's burial of Boromir, if you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings. And they send him off.
To sink in the ocean.
Line 43, look at this. With no fewer gifts did they furnish him there the wealth of nations than those did who at his beginning first sent him forth alone over the waves while still a small child. How did Scyld Sheving arrive?
As an orphan with no money.
In a boat. Are there any analogs to this? Moses. Right? Moses is born. And what does his mother do? Puts him in a little boat, push him out into the ocean, where he gets rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh, who then sends to have his mother brought so that she can nurse him, etc., completely disobeying her father, by the by. So, and what was Moses for the quote-unquote children of Israel? A deliverer. Well, what was Scyld Sheving for the people he came to? A deliverer. Okay. Then Beowulf Scylding. The ing there indicates son of. Beowulf, son of Scyld. Beloved king, famous in the strongholds. He ruled for a while, and after him arose Halfdane. It doesn't mean Halfdane was his son. It means there might be 2 generations between. There might be 20 generations between. Okay? But Halfdane arose. Halfdane is kind of a semi-historical character in Norse culture. And Halfdane had children. He had 4 children. Let's turn all this back off. I'm not going to refer to the text anymore. I'll go up. That was at 247. Halfdane had 4 children. Who are they? They're listed.
Hathgar, Hrothgar, All of the Good, and we don't know the fourth
Hagar, Hrothgar, Halgatil, or Haga the Good, and then daughter. I don't mean daughter, we're not sure. It is a daughter. We're not given her name. We are given her name in other sources, other Norse sources. Her name is variously spelled. Spell it the modern way. Ursula, or it's Old English, Irsa. I think News has a footnote. Doesn't it? Name is missing. Has been conjectured from parallel sources. It should be Irsa or Ursula. The Swedish shielding king Onela appears later in the story. Okay? Because what are we told? This person marries Onela. Onela is going to show up much, much later on. Right? Hagar, Hrothgar, Halaga, etc. So, we're told 4 children born, then success in war was given to Hrothgar. Yeah, well, what about his older brother? Because he should be king first. We're just going to skip him for now. He's going to come up later. Hrothgar is going to talk about what happened to him. So Hrothgar becomes king. Until the young soldiers grew into a mighty troop of men, it came to his mind that he should do what? I'm going to build a big old hall. How big of a big old hall? The biggest old hall that's ever been. This will be the greatest hall the earth has ever seen. Sound like, again, I'm going to note kind of possible biblical parallels. Sound like possibly anybody Old Testament-ish? Nimrod, in the town of Babel, comes up with an idea to do what?
Build the Tower of Babel.
Let's build a big old tower to reach up to heaven. And God goes, nope, ain't going to happen. Okay? I'm not saying it's an illusion. I'm saying it's a possible parallel. So Hrothgar wants to build the biggest hall the world has ever seen, which the sons of men should remember forever. And there within he would share everything with young and old that God had given him, except for the common land and the lives of men. That is, in this hall, he would act how? According to what we said when we started discussing Cadman and such. Like a good Anglo-Saxon king. He's going to sit on his throne and hand out treasure. Deal out gifts. Okay? What else does that mean? What else are we told? Except, what will he not give out? The common land, the land held by the people, and slaves. He doesn't deal in the lives of men. He doesn't give out slaves. Okay? So we're told the work was proclaimed to the many nations throughout this Middle Earth to come adorn the folkstead. Do you imagine that that was a request?
No.
Would you Swedes please come help? Well, if shield was an indication of anything, I think the fact that Hrothgar became a mighty king at a young age kind of implies that was God king too. That he also instills some fear far and near, so that people bring him tribute to help build this beautiful hall. And he gives it the name Heart. Okay? It doesn't mean heart. It means stag. Why? Probably because the front gable of this building had beams that went off like that looked like antlers. Okay? Notice, it's not Bambi. This is a warrior's hall, right? And yet, what are we told? He gives out rings, the hall towered high and horn-gabled, and awaited hostile fires, the surges of war. The time was not yet at hand when the sword-hated sworn in-laws should arise after ruthless violence. The poet has just told us they had the grand opening. The giant scissors, the big tape. Everybody can go in. They've thrown a great party. And in his very next breath, what is going to happen to this grand edifice? It's going to burn to the ground. Why? Because foreign enemies are going to come destroy it? No. The sword hate of sworn in-laws. In-laws. Who does that include?
His older brother.
Could, possibly. This is Hrothgar we're talking about. We're going to find out later on the reason Hrothgar's king, older brother's dead. Probably not his in-laws. Hrothgar, we're going to find out, his 3 children, Brethric, Hrothmund, and Freywaru. She's going to marry Froda, the son of ENGL. Okay? His people are going to be at war with his people, and the reason she marries him is to bring peace. It's probable that that's what this is talking about. Okay? ENGL, son of Froda. Got that mixed up. So, but what kind of battle would that be? I'm looking for a specific phrase. It would be civil war. Right? Because it's within the family. You know, Robert Dawson used to have a television game show. Family Feud. This would be a family feud. Where's the first family feud in quote-unquote literary mythological history, if you want?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. Thank you very much. Why? Because Cain and Abel resonate throughout this poem. So, the poet mentions the hall is going to be destroyed by fire caused by a feud of in-laws. A bold demon who waited in darkness wretchedly suffered all the while. For every day he heard the joyful din loud in the hall with the harp sound, the clear song of the shope. Who is this bold demon? Grendel. So, the hall has its grand opening. The poet tells us it's going to burn. And the very next line, Grendel is out there. And is Grendel happy? Nope. No. Why? Because every day he hears the joyful din, noise, the singing, the harp playing, the song of the shope. And what does the shope sing? He who knew how to tell the ancient tale of the origin of men said that the Almighty created the earth, a bright and shining plain, seas embraced, set triumph. What does the shope sing about? The quiz question about Cadman's hymn. Creation. It's like the Beowulf poet is familiar with the story of Cadman and says, you know, and I'm going to put Cadman right smack dab here. I'm just not going to name him. What is it that angers Grendel? The song of creation. Why? Because this grim spirit called Grendel the mighty stalker of the marches. Marchstappa is what he's called. The march stepper. But the marches are what? Sometimes it gets translated marshes. It's not it. The borders. The marched land is the borderland. Not borders like we think of modern borders, between the United States and Canada, or the United States and Mexico, or borders between the nations of Europe. Because those are fixed, rigid borders. Well, supposedly. It's kind of a neutral zone. It's like the DMZ between North and South Korea. Yeah, So what does that mean? This is where Grendel lives. He doesn't live in what society?
Human society.
Human society. He's on the outskirts. He held the moors and fens. Because who wants to live in the moors? The moors, the high, wind-swept, rocky, inhospitable grounds. Well, if you've ever been to the moors in northern England or Scotland, I don't know, you might be weird like me and go, yeah, I dig it, I'd live here. But the fens, that's swamp. So, swamp, marshy area with, let's say, English midges or good old Tennessee mosquitoes. That's the area that he, what? Held. Held. The word that's used there is the same word that's used for ruled. This was his kingdom. Well, okay. Why does he have that kingdom? So to speak. Nobody else wants it. Okay? Nobody else wants it. It's rotten land. This miserable man, but he was told a demon earlier. How can a demon be a man? Ted Bundy, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Che Guevara. He was as bad as the rest of them, so don't come in here wearing a t-shirt with his face on it, because I'll tell you later. That's how. Okay. Is Grendel a spirit?
No.
No, he is not. How do you know? Because he eats people. Spirits don't eat stuff. I mean, he literally eats people. Many people at a time. So how big is he? He is stinking big. Okay? And what else are we told? This miserable man lived for a time in the land of giants after the Creator had condemned him among Cain's race. Grendel is a descendant of Cain. What happened to Cain when God sent Cain away from where Adam and Eve were? Remember, Cain killed his brother Abel? Cain offered a sacrifice of what to God? Wasn't a sacrifice.
Put a mark on him, right?
God put a mark on him. Because Cain's like, wherever I go, people are going to try and kill me. God's like, no, they're not. I put a mark on you that says, don't touch Cain. And he sends him, and he goes off east into the land of Nod. Okay? So, there was, when he killed Abel, the eternal Lord avenged that death. The story of Cain and Abel is told in Genesis 4, 1 through 16. Okay. So what does that mean, God avenged Abel's death?
Cain was exiled.
Okay, yeah, that's how. What else though?
Cain was cursed.
What did Cain set into motion by killing Abel? What did he create? What did he start?
He created Israel.
Nope. Yeah, he did murder. He did the first murder, fratricide. What else, though? It's a word that's going to show up throughout the poem. He opens up a feud. This idea is central to the poem. The editor of the Norton Anthology, I don't know if it's still in the current one because I don't use the current But then the Norton Anthology, at least within the last 10 years, said the idea of feud is peripheral to the poem. What's peripheral mean? It's on the outside. Couldn't have been more wrong. It's dead center. It's the bullseye of the poem. It's the idea the poet repeatedly comes back to. It's a feud that brings about the burning that is the destruction of Herod. Okay? So, Cain starts a feud, and what does God do? God avenges Abel. Fourfold Germanic ethic stated what? Duty to Lord, duty to kin, duty to avenge one's Lord or kin, trusting weird. All right? How does that figure with God? Is God a Germanic God? Not literally, but figuratively within the mindset of the time in which the poem is set. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And so what does he do? Cain killed one of mine. Why? Because Abel was the child of Noah, who was the son of God. How? Because God made him. Killed one of his, so what does God do? Well, yeah, buddy. No. And that starts. What's the only problem with this feud?
He keeps going.
No. Think about the combatants. Who's on one side?
Man.
Okay, who's on the other side? God. How do you fight God?
You can't.
You can't. God's always going to win. Okay? So, no joy in that feud. That is Cain. The Maker forced him far from mankind for his foul crime. From thence arose all misbegotten things. Trolls and elves and the living dead. The word there for the living dead, if I remember in the Old English, is, hold on a second, 112. Yep, Orkneas. It's Tolkien's orcs. Okay? And also the giants who strove against God. You have two words there that are used for giants. Eotenus, native Old English, and then gigantus. Latin via French. Okay? So giants are actually mentioned twice. One of them gets translated as trolls. So all of these things, trolls, elves, what are the living dead?
Draugr.
Draugr is the Norse form. What is it today?
Zombies.
Zombies. Okay? All these things come from Cain. He gave them their reward for that. Well, what was their reward? One, it's death. Two, it's being ostracized from human society. Because all of these things have what flowing in them? Human blood. They all come from Cain. Okay? We'll stop there and we'll pick up with Fit 2. See, we're only, 500 lines behind? And then finally, Beowulf. Actually